Let's just ignore the fact that everything's on fire.
The grass and flowers are my muse.
Maestro, or Emilio Solari. So, Maestro Emilio Solari. He is an artillery officer, a field officer, and a skills officer. And, more importantly, he is very specifically an ATG artillery officer. So we're going to go through the officer skills one at a time. We'll give them a rating. So his tactical skill, chain reaction, deals skill damage to an enemy, damage coefficient, sets them on fire if they are stained, and deals fire damage coefficient to the target every second for 4 seconds. Now, rule of thumb, I say, as long as their maximum coefficient is 1500 or above, that puts them in the top band of officer skills for damaging abilities. If they don't have 1500 or above, they need to be offering something else. He does both. Okay, he offers a 1500 damage coefficient once it's maxed out. He also offers a 90 damage coefficient every second for 4 seconds. If the target has been stained, he can set them on fire. We'll get to that in a second. So it's pretty much clear. Writing's on the wall. We're doing these out of 5. This has got to be straight up a 5 out of 5. It reaches the minimum and it offers something more. Surrealist, his passive skill. This officer's troop deals 5% extra normal attack damage and 25 additional extra pen damage. Now, the additional attack damage is useful for other artillery guns, and it's also useful for the ATG. The ATG, on targets, it does not penetrate infantry like tanks, things like that. It will utilize that additional normal flat damage buff. However, where he really shines is the penetration damage buff. It does go up to 40%. That is extremely powerful. We're talking the penetration rating, which is the pen of the gun versus sloped armor, that then deals damage. That damage is now multiplied. It's extremely powerful. If you're running an anti-tank gun and you don't have this officer, you're crazy. You're utterly insane. You need him on there. Again, this has got to be, a straight up 5 out of 5 for the skills. Now, his painted shell ability. Each attack of this officer's artillery troop stains the enemy troop, reducing their damage resist by 9% for 6 seconds. If the target is already stained, another enemy troop within 1 map grid will be stained instead. This skill can be triggered once every 2 seconds. The damage resistance buff, or the damage resist reduction, the debuff applied to the target, can go up to 15%. Now, that's a fairly average damage reduction, but where this is better than other damage reduction or damage resist reduction abilities come into play is the fact that you can effectively splash damage multiple targets. I do give it a 4 because I feel like its length of which it can be applied for and how often it can be applied is pretty low. I mean, the anti-tank gun doesn't exactly fire every 2 seconds. You could get it lower than that, but you're really talking about min-maxing load time. That's not necessarily something you might want to do. You might not want to do. It depends how you play. Explosive expression increases the damage of this officer's troop by 6%. Again, that's a flat damage increase, and he's also got a damage resist in there as well. So he gets a damage buff and a damage resistance buff. Now, most damage resistance buffs, when you get them on your officer, most of them are just damage resist only, and it's normally up to 15%. This is dropped down by 5% and you do get a damage increase instead. Does he need the damage increase? Not really. It would have been nice had it been just an additional 15% damage or just an additional 15% damage resist. It's neither one nor the other, so it... Even if you don't have an anti-tank gun, you can use this skill on other field artillery officers. You could use it as a trained skill, for example, on a rocket truck, and that would be extremely effective. This gets a straight up 4. It'd be nice if it was one or the other, but the fact it's not quite top end of both means it's an easy 4. And his awakened ability, it, like so many other awakened abilities, it buffs his tactical skill. The skill deals 1500 damage coefficient to the stained target, and all troops within one map grid are set on fire, dealing 200 coefficient damage every 4 seconds. That's effectively 800 coefficient. So what we're talking about now is it not dealing 1500, we're putting him into the stratosphere for coefficient damage just off the skill. I know that's not quite how it works, but we're just looking at the overall numbers, and we're looking at 2300 damage coefficient being pumped out just from his tactical skill, which is very, very, very spicy. There's only a handful of officers that go that high. Now, obviously, this one does come with the massive caveat that it's not all targeted on the main target, and that most of that is damage over time rather than direct damage like the initial 1500. I think it would have been nicer had it been more penetration orientated, seeing that he is the only artillery general with a penetration damage increase, making him the only artillery general you want specifically for the ATG. You could put him on other things, but you'd be completely wasting your time. So for that, this gets a 4 out of 5. I want to give it a 5, but I'm not going to, because I feel like in order for it to be a 5, it would, instead of being damage over time, it would have been damage penetration. So this officer, he's going to get a 4.4 out of 5. I don't know how many officers are going to score this high. I wanted to start with Maestro because Emilio Solari, because he was one of the newest officers added. I personally play an anti-tank gun, so I've been really excited about him being added to the game. And there's only one other artillery officer that's similar to him, and that's the Bear. And that's because he is rocket truck specific in his skills. He gets a 10% firepower buff, and then gets an additional 5% if he's in a rocket launcher troop. So, again, he's a really good officer for a specific thing. Am I under attack? I'm in the middle of recording. We've already had one fight today. 12 kills. How rude. Obviously, if you're using anti-tank gun, you're not really putting it in the field. For the most part, when you roll an anti-tank gun, it is sitting in your base, it is defending your base from super heavies, from MBTs, and from anyone who thinks they can get a bit shirty with you. It's not really something you pull out onto the field. That being said, I do take him out onto the field because this is the weapon and platform I've invested the most time in. Out of all of the weapons, out of all of the officers, out of all of the upgrades, the anti-tank gun is the one that I'm mostly focused on. It's extremely useful from defending your base against pesky air raids. It's very useful to stick in the middle of an artillery army group to defend it from the air. It's extremely useful to defend the artillery army group from the ground as well, especially if you have your anti-tank gun geared for penetration damage, not just penetration rating, but penetration damage. So yes, you can use him in the field, but it requires a lot of micromanaging. It's not like an MBT. You can just let the MBT join an AG and then you just refresh it. With the artillery gun, specifically with the anti-tank gun, other players will look to destroy it immediately because it is a threat to other vehicles on the battlefield, both on the land and in the sky. It's not particularly good at taking out a base. It doesn't really deal a lot of siege damage, but you can protect units that are sieging said base. So, you know, there is that to take into consideration. If, for whatever reason, you have an anti-tank gun but don't have Emilio Solari in your lineup, you're mad. You're mad. If you saw my previous video that I done, which was just PvP of me turtling outside an enemy army group, where I farmed a total of 4,000 kills over 45 minutes, I cut it down just to the main engagements for YouTube. I was getting about 1 million DPS, and no, I was getting just under 1 million DPS at the time. I'm now getting 1 million DPS with this gun. Now, that was with Emilio at level 60, full disclosure, at level 60, with only level 1 skills. He's now at level 3 skills across the board. I assure you, he is doing clear 1 million damage a second from the base. Now, also, to put that into perspective, I'm not playing in gold. I'm not playing in the top levels of gold. I'm playing very casually in the free markets, down in the dirty silvers. I'm in silver 2, where the engagements are much more smaller and they're much more intimate. It does mean that you get, in my opinion, a little bit more fun. I have joined larger alliances where we have done gold 2, I think, and gold 1. I didn't like them. There was too much regimented attitude with times you had to be on. Doesn't suit my lifestyle. Doesn't suit my wallet, certainly. And doesn't suit my gameplay. Whereas silver, I have a lot more flexibility in silver with how I can do things. And because the engagements are a lot smaller, you can have a lot more personal impact on each engagement. That's it, really. There's not really much else to say. He scores a 4.4 out of 5. He's an amazing officer to have on your anti-tank gun. For skill training, so for his trained skills, personally, what I've done is I've used White Wolf and Whipcracker. The offensive skill from White Wolf I've used increase the damage of this officer's troop by 15%. Although she's an infantry specific officer, this specific offensive passive does not affect just infantry. It is across the board, and because she is one of those officers that you get passively awakened through doing your officer missions, it's a free 15% damage buff. Very good to put on your main weapon, whether that be an MBT, a helicopter, infantry if you're not using her. The passive I went for was an HP and damage resist buff from Whipcracker. Whipcracker's not leveled up at all. It's Hellish Training level 1, so we're just rocking an additional 16% HP and additional 3% damage buff. And at some point in the future, I'll level that up, but that's not on the cards anytime soon. I mean, I've got plenty of other officers to get through. I'll probably go through officers that I use first, and then you can see how I use them. But there you go. There you have it. That's Maestro. 4.4 out of 5.